Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Tom Lendvay. He's joining us here as CMO and co-founder of Tend Health Incorporated. He's going to talk about the recent announcement of the initiation of a clinical trial at Massachusetts General Hospital evaluating the company's Gut Microbiome CAP device for the delivery of Fecal Microbiota Transplant, or FMT, for patients suffering from C. Diff. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Tell us who Tom is and what led you to co-found, a couple of years ago, you co-founded Tend.
Yeah, so I am a professor of urology at the University of Washington in Seattle and a pediatric surgeon at Seattle Children's Hospital. And I have taken care of patients who succumb to very severe intestinal infections because of the antibiotics that I prescribe for them for the surgeries that I need to do. And a few years back, some families started asking me, is there a way that we can somehow preserve my child's microbiome before you're going to give me all these antibiotics or give them all the antibiotics that could mess up the microbiome? And it really resonated with me that not only is some of the healthcare we administer can be quite damaging, but the understanding of the microbiome is actually permeating into the general public. And I was compelled to figure out how we can provide ways of protecting the microbiome to our patients.
What is it about antibiotics that throw your gut health into disarray?
Yeah, and I don't want to throw antibiotics under the bus because they, of course, have saved and helped many millions of people. But we in the United States prescribe 269 million prescriptions for antibiotics every year, over 250 million prescriptions. And antibiotics are the atomic bombs to our healthy gut bacteria, or the microbiome that lives within us. And although the antibiotics are serving a purpose when you provide them to the patient, taking care of, say, bronchitis or pneumonia or a urinary tract infection, they are also causing collateral damage by disrupting and wiping out good bacteria in your intestines.
I heard you mention in the beginning of our conversation a specific condition. I know it as a C. diff. What is this condition? What causes it? And who's affected?
Yeah, so actually, Clostridium difficile is a bacteria that lives within many of us, but it's kept in check by other bacteria in our intestines. When you get an antibiotic or chemotherapy, you disrupt the balance of the bacteria, the community living with each other. And Clostridium difficile can overgrow, and when it does, it releases a toxin that is really creates a lot of inflammation in the intestine, such that the gut can leak out bacteria into the body and into the bloodstream and cause severe, overwhelming bacterial infections in the body called sepsis. And this affects 500,000 people in the United States annually and kills up to 40,000 people a year in the U.S. alone, costing $5 billion in healthcare costs.
Now, this condition isn't caused by the introduction of antibiotics into the microbiome.
That's right. It's caused by creating an imbalance. So the antibiotics and chemotherapy disrupt and kill off a whole slew of bacteria that are keeping that Clostridium difficile in check. And once you lose that check, those bacteria overgrow, and that's where you get the problems.
What is the current standard of care for someone living with C. diff?
So actually the first and second line therapies are antibiotics, if you can believe it, ironically. The treatment is to actually try to get antibiotics that target the Clostridium difficile. The problem is these antibiotics also wipe out more bacteria. And so there are up to 200,000 people in that 500,000 that recur, where this infection comes back. And eventually, after a number of recurrences, they become candidates, the patients, for microbiome transplants, which is regulated by the FDA for the treatment of recurrent Clostridium difficile.
There's another new treatment, is there not?
Well, so these microbiome transplant, there's different approaches for managing C. diff. There are some therapeutics that are being worked on by pharmaceutical companies, but none of them are in market at this stage. And then there's, of course, the probably the most effective management is fecal microbiota transplant, or we like to call it gut microbiome transplant, because it's the location in which the transplant occurs. And it is up to 92% effective in patients, whereas antibiotics for C. diff is somewhere in the 50 to 75% range success. So this is a technology, microbiome transplants, that actually stems from the 4th century BC in China, where they realized the value of repopulating people's microbiomes with somebody's healthy microbiome.
When you're talking healthy material, are we talking absolutely pristine material, or can the person have maybe this condition, that condition, but it's not going to affect the transfer in any way?
That's a great question. So we don't actually know what a quote healthy microbiome is. Okay. What we know is that people who have a diverse microbiome, so a lot of different family members in the microbiome, are healthier than people who have few family members in the microbiome. And generally, if you get some of that diversity into the sick patient, then that helps them be cured from the Clostridium difficile infection. The other thing is that these patients, these donors, the people who provide the microbiome transplant, they have to be rigorously screened to make sure that they're not transferring something bad into the recipient, like say viruses like hepatitis or HIV, or some bacteria that may be resistant to certain antibiotics. We don't want to give somebody an antibiotic-resistant bacteria because it could make them potentially ill and difficult to treat.
Now, I understand that TEND has a plan to change this FMT practice drastically. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the big barrier, the bottleneck for providing this amazing care, basically leveraging the superpower of our microbiome for patients, is the processing. It's clinicians being able to actually get a donor sample and turn it into a form that can be administered to the patients that need it. And so what TEND is striving to do is really improve the user experience for both the clinicians and the laboratory assistants and the patients themselves by providing a near seamless way to take a stool sample and actually process it into orally ingestible capsules within minutes, whereas the current state is multiple hours of effort to process these samples. And so TEND is leveraging that technology to really allow clinicians to provide more access to patients.
You're currently in trials, is that correct, or are the trials about to begin?
Yeah, so we've launched a trial at Massachusetts General Hospital with Dr. Elizabeth Homan, who is one of the pioneers in fecal transplants. And she is doing a study with our device, and it's basically a head-to-head study. Her method of currently making orally ingestible capsules versus our device, our CAP device, collection and processing device, to make these capsules. And they've already given us feedback that the time it takes them to do the processing and the ease at which our device provides is quite enabling for them.
Well, give us a website where we can learn more. I know 10 minutes is not a lot of time to discuss such a vast and interesting topic, but if you would, give us a website where our listeners can learn more about TEND Health and the technology that you're developing there.
Yeah, please come to our site, www.tend-health.com, and you can not only see our device in a video, in action, it's an animation as well. You can understand what our mission is, including getting information about the data, the people's microbiomes, and who's the best donor for the best recipient, much like a kidney transplant or a heart transplant where you would do a matching program. We believe that we can ultimately provide those insights to clinicians.
Tom, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Hopefully we'll speak again once the trials progress or come to an end and we get some results. I'm hoping that your device takes the industry by storm.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.